Hello everyone, welcome back to Dark Knight Tales. Before we dive in, please show your support, give this video a like and be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. So let's get started. The first story. Something happened 63 years ago that's haunted me my entire life. I've never told anyone about it, until now. It's official, I'm an old man. For the last couple of years, I've comforted myself by saying I'm in my early 70s, but math is simple and unforgiving. Today is my 75th birthday, and God, the years do fly. I'm not here for your well wishes, this is hardly a milestone I'm excited about. I'm glad to still be here, of course, but I find I have less and less to live for with every passing year. My bones ache, my kids live far away, and the other side of my bed has been empty for just over 8 months now. In fact, once I cast my vote against the Trump this November, I may have nothing to live for at all. So spare me your happy birthdays and your congratulations, if you please. I'm here because I have a story for you, and it's one I've never told before. I used to think I kept it inside because it was silly, or maybe because nobody would believe it. I've found, though, that the older you grow, the more exhausting it becomes to lie to yourself. If I'm being perfectly honest, I've never told anybody this story because it scares me, almost to death. But death seems friendlier than it used to, so listen close. The year was 1950, the setting a small town in Maine. I was a boy of 9, rather small for my age, with only one friend in the world to speak of, and his family, seemingly on a whim, decided to move 2,000 miles away. It was shaping up to be the worst summer of my life. My pop wasn't around and my mom was a charboy. Was I proud of myself when I came up with that one? So I wasn't apt to hang around the house. With some hesitation, I decided the public library was the place to be that summer. The library's collection of books, particularly children's books, was meager to say the least. But within the walls of that miserly structure, I would find no undone chores, no nagging mother, and perhaps most importantly, no other children with whom I would be expected to associate. I was the only kid with a low enough social status to spend his precious days of freedom sulking amid the bookshelves, and that was just fine with me. The first half of my summer was even more dreadful than I had imagined it would be. I would sleep in until 10, do my chores, and then ride my bike to the library, and by bike, I mean rusty log of SHT attached to a pair of wheels. Once there, I would split my time between unintentionally annoying the elderly patrons and deliberately doing so. One pleasant lady actually interrupted my incessant tongue clicking to hiss a shut up at me, the first time I ever heard a grown-up use the F word. Big deal, I know, but in those days it was unheard of. The dreary days turned to woeful weeks. I had actually begun praying for school to start again, until I discovered the basement. I could have sworn I'd roamed every inch of that library. But one day, in the far corner behind the foreign language collection I stumbled across a small wooden door I had never seen before. That was where it all began. The door was windowless and made from oak that looked far older than the wall in which it rested. It had a knob of black metal that quite literally looked ancient. I wouldn't have been surprised to learn it was crafted in the 17th century. Engraved on the knob was what appeared to be a single footprint. I had the sense that whatever lay beyond this door was forbidden to me, and therefore probably the most interesting thing I would encounter all summer. I quickly glanced around to make sure nobody was watching me, then turned the heavy knob, slipped behind the door, and shut it. There was nothing, only darkness. I took a couple of steps and then stopped, unnerved by the totality of the shadow which surrounded me. I waved my hands in front of me in an attempt to find a wall or a shelf or anything to hold on to. What I actually found was far more subtle, a small string, dangling from above, but far more useful. I grabbed it firmly and pulled it down. Back in the day, lots of light bulbs were operated with strings, and this was one of them. My surroundings were instantly illuminated. I was standing on a small, dusty platform that looked as though it hadn't seen life in quite some time. To my left was a crickety-ass spiral staircase, made of wood and appearing ready to collapse at any second. The bulb was the only source of light in the room, and it was feeble, so when I peered over the railing to see what lay below, the bottom of the staircase dissolved into the darkness. I was beginning to feel scared. This place, wherever I was, seemed to have no business in a town library. It was as though I were in a completely different building. But no 9-year-old likes to let a mystery go unsolved. Looking back, I wish I could tell my prepubescent self to turn around, go back, do anything else besides descending that staircase. You'll be spared a lot of sleepless nights, I'd say. But, of course, I didn't know that then, and I may not have listened even if I had, so instead of turning back, I took a deep breath, gripped the railing, and glared resolutely forward as I began my descent. The wood on the railing was dry and covered with splinters. I immediately let go, holding my hands out for balance as I carefully traversed the staircase. It was, or at least seemed, very long, and with only the dim glow from the string bulb far above me, my heart pounded mercilessly in the darkness. Even kids can sense when something isn't right, I think. They just don't always give a shit. By the time my feet reached the cement floor at the bottom, the light from the bulb above was very nearly a memory. But there was a new light source, and I'll never forget it. Directly in front of me was a door, massive, and a deep shade of red. The light was coming from behind the door, and it shone out in thin lines from all four sides, a sinister, dimly glowing rectangle. For the second time, I took a deep breath and went through a door I shouldn't have. In contrast to the dank room I entered from, the room behind the door was blinding. When my eyes adjusted, what I saw nearly took my breath away. It was a library. The most perfect library imaginable. I gaped in wonder as I stepped, almost reverently, further into the room. It was beautiful. It was smaller than the library above, much smaller, but it seemed to be almost tailor-made for me. The shelves were packed with brightly colored titles, both armchairs in the middle of the room were exquisitely comfortable, and the smell, my God, the smell, was simply unbelievable. Sort of a mixture of citrus and pine. I simply can't do it justice with words, so I'll suffice it to say that I've never smelled anything better. Not in my 75 years. What was this room? Why had I never heard of it before? Why was nobody else here? Those were the questions I should have been asking, but I was intoxicated. As I gazed around at all the books and basked in the smell of paradise, I could only form one thought: I will never be bored again. In truth, boredom only hid from me for 3 years. It was on my 12th birthday, 63 years ago to this day, that everything changed. Before that day, I visited my basement sanctuary as often as I could, usually several times a week. I never saw another soul down there, yet strangely remained free of suspicion. I never removed a book from that room, but instead would pick up a particular volume wherever I had stopped reading during my previous visit. I sat, always in the same deep purple armchair, and always leaving its twin baron and directly across from myself. That armchair was mine, the other was, well, I suppose I couldn't have articulated it then much better than I can now. But it wasn't mine, that's for sure. On my 12th birthday, I arrived later than usual. My mom had invited a couple classmates and some cousins over to her house to celebrate, a gesture which I found more tedious than touching. Really, I just wanted to spend my birthday sitting and reading and smelling paradise. Eventually, our guests went home, and I made it to the library about 15 minutes before closing time. That didn't matter, the workers never checked down there before they locked up. I was free to stay as late as I wished. This particular night, I was devouring the final chapters of an epic adventure, knights, swords, dragons, and the like. I didn't smell it until I read the final words and closed the book. The once exquisite aroma of that room had turned sour. I sat for a moment, unsettled. Objectively, I could recognize that the smell was actually the same as it had been before, that mixture of citrus and pine. I just perceived it differently, and I didn't like it anymore. It was the nasal version of an optical illusion, you know, the one that looks like a young woman glancing backward, but all of a sudden you see that it's really an old woman facing toward you? You can't unsee that, and I couldn't unsmell this. The spell was broken. The odor also seemed, for the first time, to be coming from somewhere specific. With a fair amount of trepidation, I stalked around the room, sniffing the air like a crazed canine until I came to a shelf near the back. The shelf was perfectly normal, with the exception of one title, a large, leather-bound cover of solid faded maroon, with one striking black footprint at the top of the spine. This was the source of the smell. I opened the front cover, and saw one sentence scrawled neatly in blood red ink atop the first page: "Rest your sorrows down, friend, and leave them where they lie." I stared at this sentence, mesmerized, as I began to retreat to my chair. I turned a page. Blank. The smell became stronger, another page, blank, and the smell grew stronger still. I stopped for a moment, suppressed a gag, and continued walking. Then, as I neared the armchairs, I turned one final page, and there, in the same sinister print, was the last thing I expected to see, my own name. I dropped the book. I began to sprint toward the door, but as I shifted my gaze forward, my heart leapt to my throat and I stopped in my tracks. The empty chair wasn't empty anymore. An aged man in a suit sat before me, one leg crossed over the other, contemplating me with piercing gray eyes and a light smirk. This was all too much. I fell to my knees and expelled the contents of my stomach onto the carpet. I wiped my mouth, staring at my vomit, when I heard the man let out a chuckle. I stared at him disbelievingly. "Who are you?" I asked, panic in my voice. The man leapt to his feet, grabbed me gently by the shoulders, and helped me to my chair. He sat, once again, in his own. "I fear we got off to a bad start," he said, glancing at the pile of sick on the carpet. "The smell, it just takes some getting used to." "Who are you?" I repeated. "Tonight, you will know hardship like you've never before known," he said. "I come as a friend, offering you refuge from it, and from all other storms which lie ahead." I wanted nothing more than to leave at that moment, but I remained seated. I asked him what he was talking about. "Your mother is dead, my boy. By her own hand, in her kitchen. The scene is gruesome, I must admit," he said in sorrowful tones, but was there a playful glint in his eye? "Surely you wish to avoid this path. I can show you a safer one." My blood ran cold at the horrors this man spoke of, but I did not believe him. "What do you want with me?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. He laughed, an old, raspy yelp that seemed to shake him to his bones. "Nothing but your friendship, dear boy," he said. Then, sensing I found his answer inadequate, he expounded. "I want you to come on a journey with me. My work is noble and you will make a fine apprentice. And maybe, when I'm done," he sighed tiredly, running his bony fingers through his thin white hair, "maybe then, my work can be yours." I stood up, shuffling toward the door but never breaking his gaze. "You're crazy," I told him. "My mom isn't dead." "She's not." "See for yourself, if you must," he said, gesturing toward the door. I threw him a contemptuous glare and bolted for the exit. As my hand closed around the knob, he said my name softly. In spite of myself, I turned around. "Your road won't be easy, friend, if it ever becomes too much for you, and I mean ever," he said, pausing to sweep his hand over the room. "You know where to find me." I slammed the door behind me and took the decrepit stairs two at a time. I exited the library, clambered onto my bike, and hightailed it home. The front door was wide open. I dismounted, leaving my bike in a heap on the ground, and approached the house cautiously. The old man was lying, he must have been. Still, tears began to sting my eyes. Heart pounding, I stepped inside and called for my mother. I heard no answer, so I turned into the kitchen. To this day, I don't know why she did it. I've lived in that small town in Maine my entire life, although I've kept mostly clear of the public library. Once, in my late 20s, I summoned the courage to step inside. Life was good at that time, and my fear had begun to morph into idle curiosity. Where the door to my basement sanctuary once stood was only a blank wall. I asked the librarian what had become of that basement, though in my heart I knew the answer. "There was no basement," she said. There had never been a basement. In fact, if she had her facts correctly, city zoning ordinances prohibited a basement in the area. I've been haunted by that sickly sweet smell, that poisonous blend of citrus and pine, ever since that long ago birthday. When I saw my mother in the kitchen that day, collapsed in a pool of her own blood, I smelled it. When a man claiming to be my father knocked on my college apartment door, begged me for money and beat me to within an inch of my life when I refused, I smelled it. When my wife miscarried our second child, I smelled it, and again when she miscarried our fourth. When our oldest son got behind the wheel of the family Buick completely SH-to-faced and got his girlfriend killed, I smelled it. I began to smell it periodically as my wife became sick. She died late last year, and now, I'm alone for the first time in more than half a century. Now, I smell it every day, and it feels like an invitation. A few months ago, I went back to the library and the small oak door with the ancient handle was there, right where it used to be. My evening walk has brought me past that library every day since, but I haven't gone inside. Maybe tonight I will. I'm frightened to die, yes, but lately I'm even more frightened to keep living. The old man was right, my road hasn't been easy, and I doubt it will get any easier. Rest your sorrows down, friend, and leave them where they lie. He promised relief. A refuge, he said. Was he right about that too? There's only one way to find out. After all, I still know where to find him. The second story. The man that followed me. My sister is 3 years younger than me, so, ever since we were small, I've always looked out for her and tried to protect her. When we were young I would always take charge and lead the way. That changed when we got older though. When she turned 7 she started getting more sure of herself, started taking charge too. 10-year-old me wasn't happy. We started fighting around that age, not actual fist fights, but a lot intense arguments over Lego pieces, whether to play hide and seek or catch, you know, serious issues. Her name is Sarah, by the way. She's 25 now and she's a lawyer at a big shot law firm in Seattle. She's always been the smart one. I'm telling you about her because that's who I was thinking about when the day started. It started off a bit like any other day actually. Normal life can be pretty boring sometimes. My alarm started ringing and I hastily and confidently hit snooze, but I couldn't go back to sleep. I remembered the dream I had just woken up from. Playing with Hot Wheels on a newly built track on Christmas. It was a specific Christmas, when I was 12. I had just built the track and started to drop the cars down it pretending I was the driver. I asked my sister if she wanted to play too. She eagerly accepted, but after a couple minutes of racing, she said we should change the game and instead pretend like we were police cars in a high-speed pursuit. I immediately accepted. I started to think about how I had lost that take-charge attitude from when I was a little kid. Hell, today I don't even say anything to people when they cut me in line at the supermarket. I wondered about my sister's role in that change in my personality. If me agreeing to play another game so automatically that day was the start of my insecurities and shyness, my passive response to everything. I always get introspective and start overanalyzing things in the mornings before I get up, but I'm usually over it by the time I get out of bed, and I did put on some clothes and that's when I noticed a man on that square with glass on the wall that lets you see. I also forget words in the morning. Anyway, the man was walking alone. He wore blue jeans and a salmon-colored t-shirt, with a large drawing of an avocado on it. I had the feeling I knew him, maybe not know him, but I thought I had seen him before. I looked down for some shoes and when I looked back up the man was no longer there. I wondered about this man and about the subtle fear I felt when I saw him. I knew him, maybe not. I finished getting ready. I was going to meet my sister for lunch. I got to the restaurant a little early. It was getting colder, I thought. My brown jacket wiggled with the subtle wind that passed by me, taking whatever shape the wind commanded. I thought about my passiveness again, how I was much like the jacket, flowing wherever others pushed me. I always overanalyze things when I'm waiting for someone, but I usually get over it pretty quickly. My sister's car pulled over, she got out and paid the meter and then strolled towards me happily. I greeted her with a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Sarah said we should go inside, it was getting cold after all. I nodded and started to move towards the door. That's when I glanced over my left shoulder. I don't know why I did, but I felt the urge to. I saw him again, the same man I saw in the morning. He was closer this time, on the other side of the street, walking alone like before. I felt like I knew him, but maybe not. As my eyes wandered somewhere else he vanished. Just like earlier I saw him only for a moment. There was something about him. He looked normal, nothing special, but there was this aura around him. I couldn't quite figure out the reason for it, for this sense of fear he instilled in me. He looked hateful and calm at the same time. Angry, but composed. I tend to overanalyze things, I know that. We got to our table and I started reading the menu immediately. I was hungry. Sarah did the same. We talked about what we were going to eat. I was on the fence. On one hand, the porterhouse looked good, dry-aged, 20 ounces, good size for the price. But my sister noticed they had a tasting menu. She noted that we would get to try more things if we ordered it. She was right, and so that's what we ordered. I noticed the man again, this time through the window next to the entrance. He had crossed the street. He was looking angrier, more hateful than before. I knew him. I was starting to realize that. Well, maybe not. He looked sure of himself, unlike me. I never looked sure of myself, always let someone else take the lead, content to watch life as secondary character, not even that actually. If I'm being honest, I'm more like an NPC. My interactions with others were few and devoid of meaning, except with my sister. She is my younger sister after all, and I always tried to protect her. The man was gone again. Just like before, I saw him only for a moment. His intentions remained a mystery to me, but I could feel his hatred simmering, slowly and gradually increasing. He wasn't there anymore, but I still felt his somber presence. Who was he? My sister's words brought me back to reality. My thoughts stopped wandering. Sarah wanted to talk to me about something she'd told me before. We need to decide what to do about Dad's company, she said. My father had passed a few months earlier and he left us each a 50% stake in his business. We were to either run it together or sell it and split the money. It wasn't a big company, hell, not even a medium-sized one, just a small decorating firm with a handful of employees and a couple regular clients. Not the most profitable business, but still more interesting than anything I was doing with my life. I think we should sell it. He owned the building and there's a warehouse full of supplies and equipment. We could make a decent amount each if we find the right buyer, Sarah argued. I didn't agree. I thought we should run it together. That's what Dad would have wanted. My sister didn't budge though. She said things at work were crazy at the moment. She was working a very important case and had her hands full, and then explained to me that I wouldn't be able to run the business without her help, so we probably should just sell it and be done with it. My first instinct was to agree. After all, that's who I was. I was passive. I let the wind guide me, never moved on my own will, never disagreed with anyone, never argued or complained. That's when I saw him again. He was sitting a few tables away from us inside the restaurant, the closest he'd been to me all day. I knew him, I felt it. But again, maybe not. His presence was heavier than before, the hatred spilled out from his familiar body, his aura of fear growing on me. That's when I decided to be proactive for once and told my sister what I wanted to do with our dad's business. This led to an argument, nothing serious, but still enough for the man to notice it from his table. He was closer now, I noticed as I listened to my sister's well-founded arguments as to why we should sell. Sarah was a lawyer, so I couldn't really do much to counter her well-prepared logical thesis. My passiveness was gaining ground again, as usual, and I started to realize she may be right. She'd always been the smart one. The man was no longer there, just like before. A few moments and he vanished. Did he pay? I thought. Did he eat anything? Who is he? I knew him, I was sure of it. Maybe not. We had come to a conclusion. My sister and I, we were going to sell the business. It made sense. I knew it, but maybe it didn't. I asked her why. She said I wouldn't be able to run the firm alone. I wanted to know what she meant by that. She let out a sigh and told me I was a bit of a pushover. I didn't stand up for myself, always flowed with the wind, never stopping to think about where I wanted to go. She was right. It hurt nonetheless. I started thinking about the man again. He had been following me, messing with me. And I did nothing. I was a pushover. I was just a spectator of my own life. I knew it. We started to argue. I was hurt by what she said and resorted to making her feel bad by pointing out that Dad would have wanted us to run the company together, that she was tarnishing his memory. Sarah was visibly hurt by that statement and said she needed some air. She got up and headed towards the door. I knew it wasn't true. I knew I was overanalyzing things again. But for some reason I couldn't stop myself from saying it anyway. I decided I should go talk to Sarah. She was my younger sister after all. I stood up and started walking to the door. I saw him again. He was back and a lot closer this time, seated only one table over from ours. He looked enraged, but did nothing of note to make think he was so. But I knew he was. I could feel his hatred boiling over. I knew him, maybe not. I slid the door open and turned the corner to the alley next to the restaurant. I assumed my sister would be there. I should talk to her. And that's when I saw him again. How did he go from the restaurant to the alley without crossing me? How did he do it so fast? Those were all great questions. I was so focused on him that I didn't notice my sister squirming at his feet. Her eyes were bloodied and swole, the once straight and tiny nose was now a puddle of shattered bone, blood and gravel from the ground where she laid. He wasn't done yet though. That man grabbed her by the hair and lifted her face until she was staring right at his belt. His knee then made a sudden movement and collided with her mess of a nose. Blood spewed out and she cried aloud. His right hand wrapped around her throat confidently, with more confidence than I ever had, and he started punching. Again and again she cried for help, but I couldn't move. Please. She wailed at me. You see, I was like the jacket. I flowed with the wind. I went where it pushed me and never resisted or complained. He kept punching her. His knuckles, now bloodied and tired, made him change the approach. He picked her up and threw her against the floor. Now it was easier. He started to kick her ribs, not the head, that would do it too fast. He broke a few of them, and the shattered fragments of the bones that once protected her lungs, now penetrated deep into them, ripping the pleura easily and letting the blood in to drown her from the inside. She didn't scream anymore. My sister could only produce a gargling, gasping sound. The blood filled her throat from the lungs bellow and gushed from the shattered nose above. He began to stomp on her throat, breaking the cartilage of the trachea. The squirming had stopped by then. The gasping sounds as well. She had suffocated in her own blood. As I looked at the deformed, bloodied body of my sister, I had kind of an out-of-body experience. I couldn't move, and so I just stood there, looking at myself and thinking about what I'd just seen, who that man was and why he did this thing to Sarah, and thinking about our argument. This is where my focus landed. I started to realize that my sister only left because of the fight, how having that silly argument caused all this. That man would never have been able to be with her alone if it wasn't for that, I thought. A strong gasp of wind made me regain control. I didn't quite know how much time had passed and the man was no longer there. Much like the rest of the day, I only saw him for a small amount of time. The wind was getting stronger. I realized I had forgotten my jacket inside, so I was only wearing a t-shirt. A salmon-colored t-shirt, with a large drawing of an avocado on it. The third story. I think I work at a place that doesn't exist. I remember when the letter came into the mail letting me know I was hired. It had managed to pull me out of a depressive episode, one of many, and gave me hope that maybe I wouldn't be a waste of space for the rest of my unnecessarily exasperating life. I had been so used to my same routine of waking up, school, work, study, sleep, that I eventually looked for a new job in another state for an impulsive change of scenery. I guess I was looking for a new life in general though. I was about to go from a fast food workplace to a security guard in a town I had never heard of. The job was strange to say the least. Everything down to the application process was a bit retro, I suppose is the right word. I had to mail in my application letter, that of which I had to print out, and was shocked to see that even though I had written my phone number in the letter, they had sent through mail my job acceptance. Before I knew it, I was making the drive from loud New York to a quiet town in Maine. Maine is different. The town I live in is peaceful at night and still during the day. Each counterpart matches perfectly together. It's a more modern town with themes of well-preserved history. The people are nice and wave on walks as you drive by. My neighbors were welcoming when I moved in. It makes me wonder how the building where I work is the way it is. The building on the outside underestimates what's inside of it. It's dull and old-looking with about 2 floors. The walls seem as though it has not been so much as rained on since the 80s, I swear. Old dirt coats it and leaves and sticks cover the top of it. It's not overwhelmingly big until you walk in. The first time I stepped foot into it I thought I had been teleported. It was way bigger inside than it seemed on the outside. It was a roller skating rink, and a large one at that. The only thing that was right about it was its correlation to the outside. Long story short, the place looked completely abandoned, which is honestly the only thing that made sense about it. At first, I called my boss asking if I was in the right place. It went straight to voicemail. I had absolutely no signal. I didn't seem to get one until I drove down the dirt path and on the road. I parked and called again. The conversation went along the lines of, "Hi there, I think I'm at the wrong place." "What do you mean?" "Well, I'm at an old skating rink." "That's it." "What?" "The skating rink, that's the place. The instructions are on the security's office desk." He just hung up. I was gonna call him back, but the entire situation was so confusing and my new developed interest with the place took over. I turned my car around and drove back. In hindsight, it was stupid. I've never even met the guy who was supposed to pay me. The building proportions were not right in any universe, and for all I knew, I was walking into a very dangerous situation, considering I had no understanding of any of what this place holds inside of it. When I went back in, I was hesitant but powered through as I searched for the office. The office is normal, unlike the rest of the place, small and normal for what you would expect in a building, which is terrifying for a place like this. This was the only room to have a signal. I found the instructions, and taped to them was a $50 bill. The note stated that I would get $50 each night and an extra $100 on the 7th night, for each week I stay. I was to work from sundown to sunrise and to only check around the building each 5 hours I was there. The next part was the weirdest part. This is what it says word for word. "Upon seeing a human in the building, even if it is yourself, lock the door, call me, turn off the cameras and do not leave the room until sunrise, no matter what you hear from the outside." Even if it is yourself. To this day, that still gives me nightmares. Everything about this job was just nightmare fuel. I wasn't sure what I had really just gotten myself into, and as weird as it sounded, I wanted to just work one shift to get a better understanding of all of it. Maybe I was blinded by the fact I had turned my entire life upside down for this job because I was naive and depressed, or maybe, in some sick, fucked up way, I knew this was gonna ruin my life and I wanted to see if it was capable of coming into fruition. I'm aware of how much of an idiot I sound as well as how much of one I am. One shift and then I would decide what to do next exactly. I locked the door, pocketed the $50 and sat down. Powering up the cameras, I could see every room in the building. There's 10 rooms in total, not including the bathrooms, in which it makes 14, but a total of 15 cameras with 3 showing the large skating rink. The upstairs is an arcade as well as an eating area, however that's a separate room itself. There is a motion sensor on each camera which will flash a red motion detected on the monitor in the room it's in. The first time I did the 5-hour checkup on the building, it was 11:45 p.m. It took a total of 15 minutes to even bring myself to get out of the chair to leave the room. I was practically on the verge of pissing myself. Each room was completely silent. Only half of them even have lights. I was completely convinced that at any point someone was gonna murder me and no one would ever find me because this place is in the middle of nowhere. I did make it through though, unmurdered at that. Weirdly enough, the night was normal, of course, besides the building itself existing and the notes seeming premonition and so against better judgment. I went back for my next shift, and the one after that, and each one I've had in the last 5.5 months. Of course though, I wouldn't be writing this if it was all normal because, to no one's surprise, it has not been. After around the 3rd week, I was doing better than I had in a very long time. I had a good routine. Go to work from sunset to sunrise, go to bed, wake up, grab breakfast, and do a bit of schoolwork. I had even begun to make friends around here. One morning I had woken up early to get food at a new place in town. It was a cute little coffee house and was a good change from the cheap coffee I had at home. One of the big changes in my life was I was a bit more social and I started chatting with the waiter. We were around the same age, so we talked about school and other boring shit. The topic of my job came up. I don't remember what exactly I said about what I did, but it was something like I worked security at some creepy as abandoned skate rink. The guy asked where in town, and when I told him the street, he just looked really confused. He told me that not only did he live one road down, but that the place wasn't there. I knew that it was impossible because I had literally gone there for the past 3 weeks of my life. I asked him where he thought it was then, and he said, "Man, I've lived here for my entire life and there has never been a skate rink here. I drive that road to get here and it's all just trees on it." It was around 2 weeks after that when I began to notice that there were things in the building that wouldn't show up on the cameras. For example, there are a few skates that have been left on the rink. 5 in total. However, only 4 would show up on the cameras. Another thing is, in the upstairs eating area, there are 6 trash bins in total, each one is in the shot of the cameras. Only 2 are seen in the footage. When you work at a place like this, you can't ask questions. You know you'll never get answers. In total, I have only ever seen 2 people here up until now. I hate saying it as if it's normal, but I don't have a choice. Like I said, I really will never understand any of this shit. The first time it happened, it was around 4 AM. I had checked all the cameras minutes prior and was just scrolling through my phone. I had grown accustomed to just leaving the door unlocked because I had had no real reason to lock it. When I saw the red flashing from the corner of my eye, I have never been more terrified in my life. The first night seems like a piece of cake at that point because I had not seen it flash that nauseating red motion detected. The camera it opened up to was number 2. The lobby. I had looked at what the monitor was showing me. I had no clue what I was about to see, and I truly think that was scarier than not being able to see anything at all. It took me about 45 seconds before I saw it. In one of the corners behind a chair, was a little kid. I couldn't see its face. I didn't know how old it was supposed to be or their race or if it was even a boy or girl. All I knew was, if I didn't listen to what I was instructed to do in the letter, I was going to die. Trying not to SHD myself, I locked the door quickly but quietly. When I called the boss, his reaction was not one I thought it was going to be. Instead of panic or dismay, he sighed and repeated the instructions to me. Except, instead of telling me to turn off the cameras, he asked me to describe it. I can't even get my words out. I was livid at the fact that he wanted me to describe the thing instead of helping me. I can barely pick out one thought in my brain, but when he repeated his instructions a second time, I just sat down and told him what it looked like. I was suddenly exhausted. Too exhausted to argue, or yell, or try to make a run for it. I guess fear does that to you. Accustomed to his character, he hung up on me right after I finished telling him what it looked like, and he left me with a simple "Okay kid, you can turn off the cameras." I spent the rest of the night shaking in fear, too scared to so much as blink, knowing it would take my eyes off the door. After that, once the sun rose, I sprinted out of there like my life depended on it. I didn't sleep for the rest of the day. I had so much to think about. On one hand, nothing bad really happened and the pay was above average to say the least. I had a good life because of the job. But on the other, I knew what I saw wasn't human. I was very aware I needed to leave. It was dangerous and far above anything I wanted to deal with. But I have a running theme of being completely ignorant. So, I went back the next night, and it was completely normal. The more friends I've made here, the more I've learned not to talk about my job. Anytime I do, they swear they've never seen it or heard about the place, so it's just best they think I work in some office building a town over. At this point, anyone I associated with has no idea about the security job. I plan to keep it that way. The second time I saw something was about 4 months in. I was in finals week, so I was enthralled in some textbook on American history when I noticed the motion detected alert. My heart did the whole skipping a beat then racing at the speed of light thing like it did the first time. This time it pulled up camera number 8. This was one of the arcade cameras. It was going to be a whole lot harder to look for a person in the arcade considering there's so much going on in the room. However, before I looked, I jumped up and locked the door and began to type in my boss's number. The phone rang as I searched, and as he picked up right as I saw what I was looking for. This time, it was a man. Instead of seeing its entire body though, he seemed to be peering over one of the arcade machines. In person, the machines are around 6.5 feet tall, and here stood some wide-eyed creature looking over it, directly into the camera. It was the same routine as before. My boss tells me the instructions in the letter, except he tells me to describe it and hangs up on me, leaving me terrified. I once again sat in the corner of the room just watching the door and made a quick escape in the morning. On my drive home that morning, I crafted a plan. I would go back to work tonight and take a picture of every room in the building. I would take a picture of the path that led to the building. I would take a picture of every single wall that made that place stand. But most importantly, I would have evidence that it's real and that I'm not losing my mind. I got there a little bit early that night. I took a photo of everything on the outside, and when I stepped inside I took about 200 photos of the entire place. Finally, I had some proof that I don't run around the woods at night, which for a while I was kind of convinced I was. That night was uneventful. I was just excited to go home and upload all of them to my computer to print it. I wanted to finally be able to tell someone the truth. I enjoy my life now. Truly. But I feel like I'm living half a lie. When I got home in the morning though, every single photo was in complete darkness. There's absolutely nothing in any of the photos. That was impossible though. All of these photos I took during the day in the bright sun. I did everything from enhancing them, putting filters on them, and eventually I had to accept defeat. I was lost. I was tired of this. I'm sure you're just wondering why I haven't quit yet. I honestly don't know. There's absolutely no reason for me to stay here, but I just can't bring myself to do it. Of course I can get other jobs, I'm aware of that. Money isn't even an issue anymore, I don't know, can't. But I guess that brings me to now. 5.5 months later. I'm currently sitting in the security office, typing this on my computer. The shift started the way it always has. I made my first amount of rounds and it was, well, uneventful. Eventually I came in here to finish an essay, and when I finished I did my regular checkup of going through each camera. When I finished, I played some games on my phone. Around 35 minutes ago, the red motion detected alert went off. Camera number 5. Camera number 5 points almost directly at my office door. I didn't have to search for any kind of person this time. I mean, it's right there. I haven't called my boss yet and I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm too scared to talk. I know it'll hear me. I know I should call him, but I'm scared that when it does hear me, it's going to kill me. Hell, I'm not sure what I'm even going to tell him when he asks me to describe it. My boss doesn't know what I look like, so it's not like I can just tell him it's me. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.